"You'll die soon anyway," Michael said, not even looking at me. "Might as well leave the house to someone who'll make good use of it." It was quiet after that. My daughter-in-law sipped her coffee, avoiding my eyes. My younger son, Peter, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The kitchen clock ticked in the silence like it had a grudge. And well, I just smiled and folded my hands in my lap. There was a time when such words would have shattered me. But not now. Not at 78. Not after burying a husband, surviving 2 surgeries, and living long enough to know when someone's love has run out of conditions. The family meeting had been Michael's idea. Just a casual lunch, he'd said on the phone last week. A chance to catch up. But I knew better. He only gathered people when something needed signing. The living room was barely warm, and the pie I baked sat untouched on the table between us. "Mom, we're not trying to be cruel," he added quickly, finally glancing at me. "It's just, the upkeep is too much for you. You live here alone. The stairs, the garden, the plumbing. I manage," I said calmly. "But for how long?" His voice was careful, lawyer-like. "It's not safe. And Peter and I have been thinking, well, Michael could move in with his boys, fix it up a bit, keep the place in the family." Ah, there it was. That old phrase, keep it in the family. As if I weren't part of it anymore. I looked around the room. The curtains, I hemmed myself. The wall where Richard, my late husband, had marked the kids' heights with pencil lines. The cabinet where I kept the chipped china my mother gave me the year I got married. To them, it was just real estate. But for me, it was a breathing thing, a body filled with memories. Peter cleared his throat. "We're not pressuring you, Mom. Just think about it." I nodded, smiling faintly, though my hands were trembling under the table. I stood up and began clearing the dishes, the pie still untouched. No one protested. The rest of the afternoon passed in a polite blur. They spoke of college plans, Michael's new job title, Peter's back pain. All the while, I moved like a ghost through the room, refilling glasses, folding napkins, keeping my silence. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask them to stay longer when they began putting on their coats. Michael kissed the top of my head. "Just think about it, okay?" I closed the door after them and leaned against it for a moment. My legs hurt. My pride hurt more. Later that evening, I sat on the back porch with a blanket over my knees and a cup of peppermint tea in my hands. The garden was quiet. September's early chill making the air crisp. Across the fence, my neighbor Jeremy was trimming his hedges. He waved. I waved back. Jeremy had been my neighbor for over 20 years, a quiet man, retired carpenter, widowed, kind. He fixed my leaky faucet last spring and refused to take any payment. "I just like having you next door," he said. I wondered then, if I were to fall one day in the kitchen, who would come? My sons? Or Jeremy? Inside, the house still smelled of pie. I wrapped the rest of it in foil and slid it into the fridge. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection. Hair whiter than last year, skin thinner. But the eyes were mine, and they weren't ready to be erased. Not yet. That night, I opened the drawer in my desk where the will was kept, read it over slowly, folded it back. Then I opened the phone book and ran my finger down the page to the name of my lawyer. The next morning, I would call him. I didn't know exactly what I'd say, but I knew who I wouldn't be leaving my house to. When Richard and I first bought the land, there was nothing here but a mess of weeds and wild grass. It was 1971, and we were newly married. 2 school teachers with more energy than money. The house we planned wasn't big, but it was ours. Every inch was argued over and dreamed about. He wanted a covered porch. I wanted a bay window. We compromised. He got his porch. I got my window. He built most of it himself, evenings and weekends, one board at a time. I held the ladder, passed him nails, painted the trim with hands blistered from the brush. We fought, of course. He cursed at the plumbing. I cried over crooked wallpaper. But when it was done, we stood in the front yard, holding hands like fools, and told each other, "This is where we'll grow old." And we did. The years came, as they do, full of slow changes. Babies, birthdays, scraped knees, late bills, anniversaries. We planted trees, lost sleep, laughed. Richard died in the spring of 2004, just a few weeks after our 35th wedding anniversary. One moment he was pruning the roses, the next, gone. Heart, fast, no warning. I remember sitting on the porch steps the night after the funeral, the house so full of flowers and casseroles and whispers that I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking, how can a house still stand when the man who built it is gone? But it did. And so did I. Michael was different after his father passed. He'd always been the ambitious one, the planner. But there was a coldness that crept in, like some layer of ice beneath his voice. He didn't cry at the funeral. Not once. Peter was the one who wept into my shoulder. Michael stood straight in his suit, already calculating what needed to be done. After Richard's death, the boys offered to help, at first. A few weekends of lawn mowing, tightening loose bolts. Then they stopped coming, unless I called. Then even when I called, they were too busy. Peter still made it once a month, sometimes less. Michael only came when he needed me to sign something. But the house kept going. And so did I. I cleaned the gutters myself. Hired a handyman when the boiler acted up. Paid the taxes, repaired the fence, repainted the back room. I downsized the garden, but kept the roses. For Richard. For me. Sometimes, I'd sit in the bay window in the late afternoon sun, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes past, and I'd think, not mournfully but plainly, that this house had seen more life than most people do in a century. That's why Michael's words hurt the way they did. You'll die soon anyway. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was the erasure. As if everything that had happened in these walls, the birthdays, the fights, the quiet mornings, meant nothing now that I was old. As if my hands hadn't built these rooms too. As if the years I'd survived here didn't give me the right to die here, on my terms. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I opened the old photo albums, dusty and cracked, but still intact. There we were, Michael at 10, holding a paper airplane in the hallway. Peter, covered in cake on his 2nd birthday. Me and Richard, younger than I remembered, grinning with paint in our hair, standing in front of a half-built house. This house. Our house. I touched the edges of the pictures and whispered, "Not yet." Not while I could still climb the stairs. Not while I could still taste coffee and walk in the garden and tell stories to the neighbor's little girl who liked to pick dandelions from my lawn. The next morning, I swept the porch, humming quietly. Jeremy came over with a bag of apples from his tree. "Too many again," he said, laughing. I thanked him, gave him a slice of leftover pie, and we stood outside for a while, talking about the weather, about his dog who was getting too old for long walks, about nothing and everything. He didn't ask questions. He never pried. He simply looked me in the eye and listened. Before he left, I asked casually, "Jeremy, have you ever made a will?" He blinked. "I have. Why?" "No reason," I said. "Just thinking ahead." He nodded slowly. "Good to do. People wait too long." That evening, I took out a clean notebook and began writing a list of what I wanted. Who should get what mattered. It wasn't long. I had no diamonds, no stocks, no summer homes. Just this house, these things, this life. But maybe that was enough to protect. And maybe it was time I did. The next few days passed like any other, which is to say, slowly, quietly, and without the courtesy of drama. Mornings were for tea and sorting the mail. Afternoons for tending to the garden or reading on the porch. Evenings for the soft sound of the clock in the hallway and my own breathing. But everything felt different now. Not louder or sharper, just clearer. Like I'd taken a cloth to the inside of a window and could finally see the truth of things. The truth was this: no one asked how I was doing anymore. Not really. Michael's wife, Diane, called once that week. Not to check in, but to ask if I still had the punch bowl set from Richard's retirement party. "The glass one with the little cups," she said, as if that detail would soften the request. "I believe I do," I answered. "Perfect. Could we borrow it for Evan's birthday next weekend? It's just easier than renting." "Of course. Easier." I said yes, because it didn't cost me anything. But she never asked if I was coming to the party. She never said, "We'd love to see you there." Just, "Michael will swing by to get it sometime." Click. That was the call. Peter dropped off a bag of groceries midweek. He does that sometimes, trying to be the good son. But he always leaves in a hurry, with some excuse in his pocket. "Work's been nuts, Mom. I can't stay long." "You work for the Parks Department, sweetheart. What's nuts about trimming trees?" He smiled sheepishly. "Budget meetings. You know how it is." I don't, actually, but I nodded anyway. Still, I appreciated the fruit. I just wished he'd remembered I'm allergic to pineapple. The receipt was still in the bag. I circled the line item in ink and left the bag on the back step. He'd see it when he returned for the Tupperware, if he remembered. That night, I sat by the window with the lamp on and looked across the street. Jeremy was sitting on his porch, same as me, a book in his lap and a blanket on his legs. He looked up, caught my gaze, and raised his hand in greeting. I raised mine back. That man has never asked for anything. Never once. Not a cup of sugar, not a favor. But he's shoveled my walkway every winter for the past 6 years. Fixed the latch on my shed. Painted the garden bench when I wasn't looking. When I told Michael about the latch, he frowned. "You really should get a professional, Mom. You can't just let random men mess around with your property." "Jeremy's not random," I said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "You don't think he might be... I mean, he's a widower, right?" The implication made my cheeks burn, not with embarrassment, but with anger, as if kindness had to come with a catch, as if no one helped anyone anymore without wanting something in return. Jeremy didn't want anything. That's what made him dangerous, I suppose. Kindness without a motive exposes the motives of those who've long since forgotten how to give. On Friday morning, I stood in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. It was Jeremy, holding a brown envelope. "Found this in my mailbox," he said. "Looks like they dropped it in the wrong one." It was from the county office. Property tax notice. I thanked him and invited him in for a scone. He hesitated, then nodded. "I've got 10 minutes," he said, stepping inside and wiping his feet. We sat in the kitchen, the radio playing softly in the background. The kind of easy silence only two old people can share without it feeling awkward. Then Jeremy looked at me over the rim of his cup and said, "You seem different this week." Different? Not sad, just settled. I smiled. I suppose I am. We didn't speak of wills or sons or punch bowls. We talked about plum trees and the price of eggs. But when he left, he put a hand gently on my arm and said, "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you know where I am." I nodded. And after he left, I walked straight to the living room, sat down at my desk, and pulled out my address book. Found the lawyer's number again. This time, I didn't just stare at it. I picked up the phone, dialed. "Good afternoon," a voice answered. "Hayward and Boone, how can I help?" "Yes," I said. "This is Gladys Howell. I'd like to schedule a meeting to update my will." The law office was a modest brick building on the edge of town, tucked between a bakery and an accountant's office with faded lettering. I'd driven past it for years, always thinking it looked too quiet to be important. But inside, it was warm, neat, and smelled faintly of lemons and dust. A young man greeted me at the front desk. His suit didn't fit quite right, like he'd borrowed it for an interview and never took it off. "Good morning," he said, adjusting his tie. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, with Mr. Boone." He scanned the schedule. "Gladys Howell?" "That's me." He smiled. "Right this way." The office door opened, and an older gentleman stood to greet me. Gray hair, thick glasses, corduroy blazer. He looked exactly how you'd want a lawyer to look if you weren't trying to impress anyone. "Mrs. Howell," he said kindly. "Please, come in." We sat across a wooden desk that bore no signs of urgency. Just a calendar, a pen holder, and a neat stack of folders. No blinking lights, no rushing. "So," he said, "you'd like to make changes to your will?" "Yes," I said simply. He nodded. "Is there an existing will we're updating, or are we starting fresh?" "There's one on file. You drew it up for me 12 years ago, after my husband passed." He pulled a file from a drawer and opened it with quiet efficiency. "Ah, yes. Richard Howell. House to be split between your sons, personal effects to be distributed evenly, a small fund for each grandchild. Is that still accurate?" I let the silence hang in the room a moment longer than it needed to. Then I said, "No, I'd like to make significant changes." He nodded again. Professional, but not impersonal. "Very well. Tell me what you'd like." "I want the house," I said, "to go to someone else entirely." His pen paused over the paper. "I see. May I ask—" "No family member," I interrupted. "Not Michael, not Peter, not anyone in the bloodline." He didn't press. "And the beneficiary is—" "Jeremy Waters, my neighbor. He's on Maple Drive, just across from me. He's been kind to me for years." Mr. Boone jotted the name down. "And what about the rest of the estate? Bank accounts? Belongings?" "I'll leave some keepsakes to my granddaughter if that's permissible. Small things. My sewing box, my wedding ring. The rest, I want liquidated, sold if necessary. I'd like the proceeds to go to a local literacy charity, the one Richard and I used to support." Boone looked up, mildly surprised. "That's quite a shift, Mrs. Howell." "Yes, it is." There was no tremble in my voice, no hesitation. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was tired, maybe. But more than that, I was clear. "May I ask," he said gently, "has there been pressure from your family to change your current will?" I smiled faintly. "You could call it pressure. You could also call it presumption." "I understand." His voice softened. "You're not the first client I've had to make this kind of change. But once it's signed and witnessed, it's binding." Good. He walked me through the steps carefully. The documents would be drafted and sent for review within a few days. A second appointment would be scheduled for signing with 2 witnesses. He recommended bringing someone impartial, a neighbor, perhaps. I smiled. I think I can find someone. We spent another hour discussing details, my medical directives, the title deed, the importance of keeping the revised copy safe and informing at least one trusted person of its existence. When we were done, he stood and extended his hand. "You're not the only one making choices like this lately," he said. "It's more common than you think. People get to a certain age and realize the ones who show up out of love aren't always the ones who share your last name." Outside, the sky was clear and sharp, the sun low over the rooftops. I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home, watching the wind stir the golden leaves on the sidewalk. I had always thought changing a will would feel like betrayal, but it didn't. It felt like coming up for air. I tried Peter first. He was the easier one, softer. He still called me Mom without an edge. He still hugged me when he remembered. We met at the coffee shop near the park, a place where the music was too loud for my taste, but Peter liked their muffins. He was already seated when I arrived, glued to his phone, thumb moving fast. When he looked up, he smiled. "Hey, Mom, you look nice." I thanked him, ordered tea, and sat down. We made small talk for a while, weather, local roadworks, a new Thai place opening in town. Then I said, "Peter, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." His smile wavered. "Okay. That meeting at my house last week, whose idea was it really?" He blinked. "Well, technically, it was Michael's, but we both agreed it was time to talk about, the future." "Whose future?" I asked softly. Peter shifted in his seat. "Yours. Ours. Mom, you're getting older. You shouldn't have to handle everything alone." "And what about the house?" His eyes dropped. "Look, Michael's got plans. He thinks it'd be smart to renovate, maybe sell later. You could move into assisted living or something more manageable. Did you think that too?" He hesitated. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to argue. You know how he gets." "I know exactly how he gets," I said, and sipped my tea. "But I was hoping you might get differently." Peter looked pained. "Mom, it's not personal. He's just practical." "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "He's not. He's impatient and entitled. And you're afraid of standing up to him." He flinched. "I didn't raise you to follow someone else's lead," I added. Peter looked at me, truly looked. "Are you angry with us?" "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm disappointed, which, believe me, is worse." He looked down at his muffin, peeled back the paper slowly. "I haven't made any decisions yet," I lied. His head snapped up. "But I'm thinking about what comes next. I just thought I should tell you directly." Peter nodded. "Thanks for that, Mom. Really." But I could see it in his eyes. Worry. Not sadness. Not concern for me. Worry about what this would mean for him. I left the coffee shop with a bag of leftover muffins I didn't ask for. 2 days later, Michael called. "Peter told me you're thinking about changing your will?" I was weeding the garden. I wiped my hands on my jeans and kept my voice calm. "Did he?" "Yes," Michael said, tight. "And I just want to know why." The way he said it, as if he had a right to demand the answer. "Because I'm allowed to," I replied. "It's my home, my life." He exhaled harshly. "Mom, this isn't like you. You're being reactive." I almost laughed. "You're a logical person," he went on. You know that passing things down within the family, keeping property stable, it's the smart thing. For whom? I asked. Silence. You think I'm dying, I said. And maybe I am, but I'm still alive. And I've watched the way you circle this house like it's already yours. Mom, don't be dramatic. You stood in my kitchen and told me I'd die soon anyway. Michael sighed. It was a poor choice of words. But you know I didn't mean. But you said it, I cut in. And you meant it enough not to take it back. There was another long silence. When he spoke again, his tone was more measured, almost rehearsed. Look, we don't have to fight about this. Let's just sit down and go over options. Maybe talk to a financial advisor, someone neutral. I smiled. I've already talked to someone neutral, my lawyer. He was quiet again, then, you're making a mistake. No, I said. I've made plenty, but not this one. I ended the call before he could reply. That evening, Jeremy came by with a jar of blackberry jam. No reason, he said, handing it to me at the porch. Just made too much. I held the jar in both hands. The weight of it steadied me. I looked at the man who'd never once asked for a thing, and I smiled. You're a good neighbor, Jeremy. He shrugged. It's not hard to be kind. Funny, I thought. My own children made it look impossible. It was the following Saturday when I truly saw it. How Michael already considered the house his. I hadn't invited him. He hadn't asked. He just showed up with his youngest son, Jordan, striding up the path like he owned the place. I was trimming deadheads off the rose bushes when the sound of car doors startled me. I turned, shears still in hand. Thought we'd swing by, he called, waving like this was normal. Jordan, 17 and already 6 feet tall, followed him with headphones draped around his neck, chewing gum like he had somewhere better to be. I didn't know you were coming, I said. Michael clapped his hands together. Spur of the moment, wanted to show Jordan the old place. The old place. He didn't ask if it was a good time, didn't ask if I needed help with the garden. He walked right past me onto the porch and opened the door without knocking. Inside, I heard him talking. See, buddy? This living room's huge once you clear out all the clutter. Knock down that half wall, opens it up completely. Clutter. He meant my furniture, my books, my life. I stepped inside slowly, wiping my hands on my apron. Jordan was standing by the fireplace, looking unimpressed. Wouldn't need much work, Michael continued, his voice carrying easily. Just cosmetic stuff. Paint, flooring, maybe central air. God, the kitchen needs gutting. I stood in the doorway, invisible. You know, he went on, Diane's been looking at those open-plan kitchens. You could knock out this wall, make one big space, add an island. Easy resale value later. He was already redesigning it. And I wasn't even dead. Jordan looked at the staircase. It's kind of creaky. It's old, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Michael turned. Mom, we were just making plans, I finished for him. I noticed. He tried to smile. Nothing's set in stone. No, I said. It never is. Until it is. Jordan looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Can I wait in the car, Dad? Michael waved him off. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water with hands that didn't tremble. Not in front of him. Michael followed. I didn't mean to upset you. No? I turned to face him. Then what would you call it? He sighed. Mom, I'm trying to help. You're living alone in a house that's too much for you. And yes, eventually it'll come to one of us. I'm just being realistic. Eventually, I said. But not yet. And not to you. He blinked. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I just looked at him the way a mother looks at a son she no longer recognizes. Not with anger, but with a quiet grief. I've lived in this house for 47 years, Michael. I've loved it. I've lost in it. Your father built it. I buried him from it. You were born in that room upstairs. He crossed his arms. And now it's a liability. No, I said, voice calm. It's a home, but you see it like a project, a number, something to flip. And I see that now more clearly than ever. He was quiet, but his eyes darted, calculating, defensive. You think because I'm old, I'm done, that my things are junk. My life, clutter. I never said, you didn't have to, I interrupted. We stood there, a breath apart, the kitchen somehow smaller than it had been that morning. Finally, Michael exhaled. You're being emotional. No, I'm being observant. He looked at his watch. I have to get Jordan to practice. Of course he did. They left without saying goodbye. I stood in the foyer for a while after the door closed. Then I went to the window and watched his car drive off. An hour later, I was back in the garden, cutting back the dead stems. Jeremy called from across the fence. You all right, Gladys? I paused, shears in hand, sun warm on my back. I am now, I said. I spent Sunday morning baking. It had always been my way of thinking. Some people paced, some people wrote lists. I sifted flour, measured sugar, pressed butter into dough until my hands found their rhythm. I didn't need the pie, really. I just needed the process. Cherry this time, Richard's favorite. The kitchen filled with the scent, sweet and sharp, and I stood at the stove watching it bubble through the lattice. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the oven. No phones ringing, no voices, just the tick of the old mantel clock and the occasional creak of settling wood. I moved through the rooms slowly after that, dusting, folding, straightening small things. Not because they were out of place, but because I wanted to touch what was mine, the quilt on the back of the armchair, the photograph of my wedding day, the china teacup I never used because the handle had a crack. Each object was a thread in the tapestry of my life. And I could feel in my bones how ready some people were to unravel it. Michael's visit the day before had stripped away any doubt. It wasn't just what he'd said. It was how easily he'd said it. How comfortably he walked through my home as if I were already gone. How my silence seemed to confirm his belief that I didn't matter anymore, that I wouldn't resist. But I would. Because I remembered who I was. I remembered being 24, dragging lumber from the hardware store in a borrowed truck, laughing because Richard had no idea how to build a porch, and no shame in trying anyway. I remembered raising 2 boys on a teacher's salary and keeping this roof above our heads, even when the roof leaked. I remembered staying up nights after Richard died, not knowing how I'd pay the heating bill, but refusing to sell the house because it was the last part of him still standing. I remembered all of it, and I decided, no more hesitation. After lunch, I changed into a clean blouse and a cardigan and walked across the street to Jeremy's. His porch was tidy, the paint on the railings new. I knocked, and he answered with that quiet smile of his. "Afternoon, Gladys," he said. "Everything all right?" "Yes," I replied. "And I have something to ask you." He stepped aside and let me in. We sat at his kitchen table. The wood was scuffed in the corners, worn soft by time. A kettle whistled on the stove. I looked him in the eye. "You've been good to me. more than my own children. I want you to know, when I go, the house will be yours." He didn't speak right away, just looked at me, his brow creased, mouth slightly open. "You don't have to say anything now," I added. "You can think it over. I've already spoken to my lawyer. It's just paperwork at this point." Jeremy leaned back in his chair, the kettle still whistling behind him. "I don't know what to say," he said finally. "That's a lot." I nodded. "I know." "You sure you want to do this?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." He turned off the stove and poured us both tea. We drank in silence for a moment. "I never expected anything from you," he said. "I know." He looked out the window. "I wouldn't change a thing, you know. The house. I'd leave it just like it is. That, more than anything, nearly broke me." "Thank you," I whispered. We sat for another hour, talking about things that had nothing to do with money or property. Just two old neighbors, drinking tea, while the world outside went on the same as always. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the new copy of my will in my lap. I ran my fingers along the envelope, then placed it in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't angry. But for the first time in years, I felt safe. Not because someone would take care of me, but because I had finally taken care of myself. The second appointment at the law office was scheduled for Thursday at 10 sharp. I wore my navy skirt, the one with the hem I'd mended twice but couldn't bear to part with, and a cream blouse Richard once called my Sunday armor. I looked in the mirror before I left the house and nodded to myself. I still looked like someone who knew what she was doing. Mr. Boone greeted me in the same corduroy blazer, glasses perched on his nose. He offered me a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Mrs. Howell," he said, "everything's in order." The conference room was small but bright. A window let in the fall light, soft and golden, and the table had already been set, with a neat stack of papers and 2 pens. Not the plastic kind, real ones. Heavy, serious. 2 witnesses were already waiting, a young woman from reception and an older man I didn't know, perhaps another client who'd agreed to stay. Neither of them asked questions. They didn't need to. That was part of the job. Mr. Boone sat beside me and explained each section of the document again, though I'd read it already twice at home. He pointed to the legal language, the property, the named beneficiary, the instructions for sale of all other assets, the charitable allocation. Then he looked at me. "Gladys," he said gently, "do you understand the full extent of what this document does?" "I do." "Is anyone forcing or coercing you into signing it?" "No." "Are you of sound mind and judgment?" I smiled. "Would I be here if I weren't?" He smiled back. "Very well," he said. "Then let's begin." He handed me the pen. I signed my name once, twice, 3 times. The ink flowed smoothly, no shaking, no hesitation. Then the witnesses signed in their turn, solemn but efficient. Mr. Boone gathered the pages, tapped them into alignment, and slid them into a folder. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "Your new will is official." It should have felt heavy, but it didn't. It felt light. He gave me a certified copy for my records. "Keep this somewhere safe. I recommend letting someone you trust know where to find it." "I already have." "And if anything changes, any details, you can amend it at any time." "I don't think it will," I said. "But thank you." On the way out, the receptionist offered me a cup of coffee, but I declined. I had somewhere else to be. I stopped by the library on the way home. It had nothing to do with the will, and everything to do with the part of me I had nearly forgotten. I borrowed a book on garden pruning and another on European train travel, just because I liked the cover. On impulse, I picked up a novel, too. A romance, the kind I hadn't read in decades. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered along the sidewalk like they were in a hurry to get somewhere. I walked slowly, feeling them crunch underfoot. At home, I placed the will copy in the nightstand drawer. Under the linen handkerchiefs, I still kept folded by habit. Then I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. Jeremy came out to check his mailbox. He looked up and saw me watching, gave a little wave. I lifted my hand and nodded. He didn't know yet, not fully, but he would. One day. Not because I needed to be thanked, but because I needed to know that when the time came, the house would pass to someone who saw it not as a possession, but as a presence. Something built, lived in, loved, and now protected. The house didn't know, of course, but I did, and that was enough. The following weekend, Jeremy invited me over for supper. He said it like it was nothing. "I made stew," he called across the fence. "Too much for one. Want to help me fix that problem?" I said yes, without thinking. It wasn't a date. Don't be ridiculous. It was just two neighbors, both widowed, both too old to fuss over appearances, sharing a meal so the food didn't go to waste. That's what I told myself. Still, I brushed my hair and changed my blouse before walking over. It wasn't vanity. It was courtesy. His house was warm when I stepped inside, filled with the scent of garlic and thyme, the kind of smell that lingers in the wood long after the food is gone. There was music playing low in the background, something with violins, but not too slow. He took my coat and motioned to the kitchen table. "Nothing fancy," he said, "just stew and cornbread." It was more than enough. We talked about the usual things at first. Weather, the neighbor's yappy dog, the new family 2 streets over whose boys had already broken 3 mailboxes. But then the conversation shifted, quietly, as it tends to do when people feel safe. Jeremy spoke of his wife, Linda, how she used to sing while folding laundry, how she made pies from scratch and always forgot the sugar in the first batch. "She wasn't perfect," he said, "but she made the house feel like someone was waiting for you." I nodded. Spoon paused in my bowl. "Richard used to fix things that weren't broken, just so he could say he was handy." Jeremy smiled. "We were lucky, weren't we?" I thought about that. About love that had run its course not through bitterness, but through time. "Yes," I said. "We were." After dinner, we washed the dishes together. He dried. I wiped the counter. There was no discussion. It just happened, the way it does when 2 people move through a space with quiet ease. When everything was clean, he poured us each a small glass of sherry. We sat on his back porch, wrapped in our own silence. The sky had gone dusky, the air cool but not biting. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes were clinking gently in the breeze. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, not looking at me. "Moving somewhere smaller, easier." "I did," I admitted. "For a long time I thought the house was too big, too full of ghosts. And now? Now I think the ghosts are mine, and I have the right to keep them." He nodded. I looked at his hands resting on the arm of his chair. Large, worn, clean. Hands that had built things, repaired things, fed someone besides himself. I didn't tell him about the will that night. I didn't need to. Some things are better left unsaid, when the silence already holds them. Before I left, he walked me to the door. Didn't offer to hold my arm. Didn't fuss. Just stood by, a steady presence. "Thanks for supper," I said. Thanks for the company. I stepped outside, the night air brushing my face like cool cloth. As I crossed the street, I looked back once. His porch light was still on, a small square of gold in the dark, and somehow it made the whole neighborhood feel safer. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. I was returning from the library. Nothing unusual, just a new stack of novels and one heavy gardening book I wouldn't read, but liked the pictures in, when I saw Michael's car parked at the curb. Not in the driveway, not up by the porch. At the curb like someone who wasn't sure if they should be staying long. He was sitting inside, engine off, staring at the house. I didn't wave. I walked up the path, slowly, purposefully, bags in one hand, keys in the other. When I reached the porch, he stepped out. "Hey," he said. His tone was neutral, but his eyes weren't. There was a tightness to them, something simmering. "Michael," I said calmly. "Didn't expect you." He followed me up the steps. "We need to talk." I unlocked the door. That's never a good opener. Once inside, I set the books on the table and headed to the kitchen. He followed, uninvited, of course. "I ran into Greg Boone yesterday," he said, standing stiff by the counter. I didn't answer right away, just filled the kettle and put it on the stove. He mentioned, offhand, that you'd been in, updating documents. Still, I said nothing. "Mom," he snapped, "is there something you want to tell me?" I turned, leaned my palms on the counter. "What would you like to know?" "Don't play games," he said sharply. "You changed the will, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "I did." He exhaled like I'd punched him. "Why? Why would you do that?" I watched the steam begin to rise from the kettle. "Because the person I had originally left this house to no longer respects me. And I don't believe in rewarding unkindness." He blinked. "You think I don't respect you?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you've been circling this house like it's already yours. I think you speak of me in the past tense. And I think you forgot something important." "What?" "That I'm not dead." His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being exact." He stepped forward. "So who is it then? Peter, one of the grandkids? That neighbor guy?" I didn't answer. He read the silence as confirmation. "You've lost your mind," he muttered. "You're giving the house to some old man across the street? That's insane. He's never treated me like I'm invisible." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's just being nice to get something from you." I stared at him, level. "And what is it you've been trying to get from me all these years, Michael?" He flinched. "I paid your tuition, helped with your mortgage, took care of your boys when you and Diane were busy building your perfect life. And the only thing you've offered me in return is your impatience." He started to speak, then stopped. "I told you," I said. "I've made my decision. The paperwork is done. This is your family," he said. "Your blood. Doesn't that mean anything?" "Blood's not loyalty," I replied. "And family isn't something you inherit like an asset. It's something you tend to, like a garden." The kettle whistled behind me. I turned, poured the water into 2 cups, added a tea bag to one, left the other untouched. "I'll leave you some time to think," I said, placing his cup on the table. "But not to change my mind. That part's over." Michael stared at the cup, then back at me. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said again. "I'm correcting one." He left a few minutes later without drinking his tea. I watched from the window as his car pulled away, too fast. The tea went cold on the table, untouched. But mine? Mine was warm, steady in my hands, and just the way I liked it. He came back 2 days later. This time he didn't come alone. It was Diane who rang the bell. I opened the door to see her standing there, arms folded, Michael a step behind her, lips pressed into a thin, stubborn line. "Gladys," she said, all sweetness and steel. "We'd like to come in." I stepped aside. Let them. They walked in like they owned the place, which I suppose is what they were here to dispute. "I've made coffee," I said. "If you've come to talk, it might as well be over something hot." Michael didn't sit. He paced near the fireplace like a man preparing for a courtroom. Diane did sit, perched, back straight, knees crossed, looking like a woman who'd been waiting years for this moment. "I want to start by saying we're concerned," she began, in the tone people use with difficult patience. "Michael told me about your visit to the attorney. We're just surprised." "I can imagine." She smiled tightly. "You've always said you wanted the house to stay in the family, that it was your legacy." "It is," I said, "and I haven't changed my mind." Michael turned. "Then why are you handing it over to someone who isn't family?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're assuming you know everything." "You won't even deny it," he snapped. "I don't need to." I picked up my cup, sipped slowly. "You came here to tell me I'm wrong, not to ask why I did it." Diane leaned forward. "Gladys, it just doesn't make sense. You're clearly vulnerable." "Stop right there," I said, placing my cup down. "I'm old, not weak. Don't confuse the two." Michael exhaled sharply. "So what's this about? Punishment? Because we didn't call enough? Because we suggested a safer living arrangement?" "No," I said. "It's about dignity. Something I've quietly surrendered, piece by piece, for years. I didn't even notice it was gone until you sat in this very room and said I'd die soon anyway." Diane's expression flickered. "And I realized," I went on, "you weren't being cruel. You were being honest. You believe it. You believe that because my hair is white and my hands shake a little, I'm done. That I'm just a placeholder between your now and your later." "That's not fair," Michael said. "No," I said. "It isn't." He walked over to the window, stood with his back to me. "He's using you." "Jeremy?" "Of course, Jeremy. He's alone. Of course he'd cozy up to you." "You make kindness sound like manipulation." Diane stood now, too. "Gladys, if this goes forward, it's going to cause a scandal. People will talk. The family will be split. Your grandchildren—" "I've thought of them," I said quietly. "I think of them more than they think of me." Michael turned. "Do they know? Do the kids know what you're doing?" "No," I said, "because this is between us. And frankly, I'm not sure I want them dragged into it. They have time to become better people. You don't." There was a long, heavy silence. Diane broke it. "If you do this, we won't forget it." "I'm counting on that," I said. She shook her head, walked toward the door, her heels clicking across my floor. Michael stayed a moment longer, his expression hard to read. Anger, pride, confusion, maybe all three. "You raised me," he said finally. "You should have done better." The words were meant to wound, but they didn't land the way he expected. "I did the best I could," I said. "But I'm not done raising people yet." He didn't reply, just followed his wife out, the door shutting with a soft but certain click behind them. I stood in the quiet afterward, letting the echo of their voices settle like dust. In the garden, the wind moved through the trees, unbothered. And in my chest, something stirred. Not rage, not sorrow, Relief. I hadn't planned on telling anyone else. Not really. The confrontation with Michael and Diane had left the house too quiet, the air still buzzing with unsaid things. I spent the next morning folding laundry I didn't need to fold, wiping down already clean counters, retying the curtains just to have something in my hands. And then the doorbell rang. It was Ava, 17, tall like her father, but with softer eyes. She always came without warning, always with a kind of gentle curiosity, like she wasn't sure whether I needed company, but wanted to try anyway. "I was walking home from choir," she said, holding up her backpack as proof. "Thought I'd stop by." I opened the door wider. "Come in, I've got lemon shortbread." She grinned. "You always do." We sat at the kitchen table, her legs folded underneath her like a cat, crumbling cookies into napkins. I poured her tea, though she preferred soda, and she drank it anyway. She looked around after a while. "It smells different in here." "Different how?" "I don't know. Less heavy." I smiled. She always had a way of saying things without meaning to. "You want to talk about it?" she asked quietly. "About what?" "Whatever's made it lighter." I looked at her. Really looked. Freckles across her nose, chipped nail polish, the gold chain around her neck that I gave her when she turned 13. "Your father's angry with me," I said. She nodded. "I know. He's pacing around the house like someone stole his wallet." I laughed. It surprised both of us. She leaned forward. "It's about the will, isn't it?" I paused. "Has he said anything to you?" "Not directly, just a lot of loud phone calls and some muttering about lawyers." "Then yes," I said. "It's about the will." She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just waited. "I've changed it," I said. "The house is no longer going to him." She blinked once. "Good." I raised my eyebrows. "He doesn't deserve it," she said simply. "He talks about this place like it's a business, like it's a spreadsheet waiting to be balanced." "And what do you see?" "I see you," she said, "and Grandpa, and birthdays in the garden, and the way you always fold the towels in threes." I swallowed something thick. "I'm leaving it to Jeremy," I said. "My neighbor." She nodded slowly. "I like him. He always waves at me." "He doesn't want anything," I said. "And that's the only reason I trust him." Ava sat back, eyes thoughtful. "Is it weird that I'm proud of you?" That nearly undid me. "No," I said. "It's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in years." She looked at me then, not as a child to an elder, but as one woman to another. And in that moment, I felt something shift. As if maybe, just maybe, I hadn't failed entirely at motherhood if this girl had come out of all that noise. "He's not going to take it well," she said. "He already hasn't." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was warm, firm, real. "I'll help if you need me," she said. "You already have." We sat like that for a while, her hand over mine, the silence between us soft and full. When she finally stood to leave, I walked her to the porch. "Tell me something," I said, as she stepped onto the path. "Do you want anything from this house? Someday?" She turned. "Only the kitchen chair with the wobbly leg." I laughed. "Why that one?" "Because it's always been mine." I watched her walk down the street, her braid swinging behind her, and I thought, maybe this is what legacy really is. Not property, not paperwork, but being remembered by someone who saw you clearly. I went back inside and sat in her chair, the one with the wobble, and didn't bother to fix it. Some things are meant to stay just a little bit imperfect. Dear Richard, it's been over 20 years, And I still reach for your pillow sometimes in the middle of the night. Just a hand, half asleep, searching for something that's no longer there. Funny how the body remembers things long after the mind has let them go. I never got used to the quiet after you left. People say you do, but they're wrong. You just learn how to walk around it. You water the plants. You fold the laundry. You speak to no one for hours and pretend it's what you wanted. The house hasn't changed much. I keep it clean, the way you liked it. I fixed the leaky faucet you always said you'd get to, though I hired someone this time. Not because I couldn't try myself, but because the wrench was heavier than I remembered. The boys. Well, they're older now. Michael's taller than you ever were. He wears suits and carries a phone he never puts down. Peter's softer. Still laughs too easily, just like he did when he was a boy. But they're both tired in ways we never were. Or maybe we just didn't show it back then. I had a family meeting, Richard. You'd have hated it. Michael told me to leave the house to him. Said I'd die soon anyway. Said it with the same voice he used to ask for seconds at dinner, like it was nothing. And I didn't fight. I smiled. I served pie. And later that night, I opened the drawer where our will sat, and I unfolded it like it was someone else's story. I read your name, written in black ink, and I realized I'd been holding on to more than just paper. I was holding on to you. I think part of me believed that if I kept everything as it was, your shoes in the closet, the garden how you left it, then I wouldn't have to make any new decisions. But life doesn't let you stand still. Not really. So I made a decision. I changed the will. I didn't give the house to either of the boys. I gave it to Jeremy, the man across the street. He's kind, quiet, a carpenter like you, though more deliberate. He never asks for anything, just shovels my snow, checks my gutters, brings me jam when he makes too much. I can hear you now. Gladys, you can't give the house to the man with the bad knees? But you'd have liked him, Richard. He respects silence, and he doesn't speak to me like I'm a relic. I want you to know, I'm not angry with Michael, not even hurt, really, just done. There comes a point when a woman must stop waiting to be seen, must stop hoping that being good and quiet will earn her gentleness in return. You always saw me, even when I didn't ask for it. Do you remember that spring when the pipe burst under the kitchen sink and water went everywhere? I sat on the floor, soaked to the skin, and started laughing like I'd lost my mind. And you knelt down beside me, took my face in your wet hands, and said, "We'll mop it, and then we'll go get burgers." You never made anything feel like the end of the world. I miss that. I miss you. I miss how you always let the toast burn because you liked the crunch. How you hummed when you thought no one could hear. How you'd sit with your back against the porch railing, eyes closed, breathing like the world owed you nothing but a breeze. I think I'm finally learning how to do that. Breathe without apology. This house, it's not just lumber and paint. It's us. Our arguments, our Sundays, our quiet recoveries. It's the shape of our marriage in floorboards and window panes. But it's not sacred. It's not holy. It's not immune to time. So, I'm letting it go. But not to someone who sees it as an investment. To someone who will sit on the porch like you did. Who will trim the hedges and fix the lock and leave the paint imperfect in the corners. Someone who will say goodnight to it before turning out the lights. I think you'd understand that. I hope so. If there's any part of you still near, I hope you know this wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. Mine. Ours. With love, Gladys. The first frost came early that year. I woke to a lawn dusted in silver. The rose bushes bowed with the weight of cold. Everything looked like it had been gently forgotten overnight, like the season had come while we weren't paying attention. I pulled the wool shawl tighter around my shoulders and stepped outside, my breath soft in the air. The steps creaked beneath me. Old wood, older woman. But I made it down just fine. I still could. That mattered. Jeremy was across the street, sweeping leaves from his porch. He looked up and gave a small salute with his broom. I raised my hand in return. For a while, I just stood there, arms folded, watching the world behave as if nothing had changed. And really, it hadn't. Not to the birds on the wires or the children still late for school. But inside this house, the balance had shifted. And I felt it. Every hour. Peter called the day before just to talk. He didn't ask about the will. Didn't mention Michael. He asked how my knees were. Asked if I'd tried that lemon balm tea he'd read about. Told me his daughter had painted something in art class, a crooked sunflower, mostly yellow with too much brown. She said it looked like your kitchen, he laughed. She's not wrong, I said. We talked for 20 minutes. It was enough. After I came back inside from the porch, I stood in the hallway for a long while, looking at the photographs along the wall. Not the formal portraits, the real ones. Michael and Peter, standing barefoot on the lawn in matching pajamas. Richard, shirtless, holding a hammer and grinning at something off camera. Me, caught mid-laugh, probably at something no one remembers anymore. I ran my fingers along the edges of each frame as if touching the past might fix it in place. I took 3 of them down, wrapped them in cloth, placed them gently in a box. Not everything needed to stay on the wall. Later that morning, Jeremy knocked, not to talk, but to bring in my empty trash bin from the curb. He always did that on Wednesdays, always without a word. Cold today, he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. It is. You got heat running all right? I do. He nodded. Let me know if you need anything. I will. He turned to leave, but paused. You seem, he began, then shook his head. Never mind. I smiled. Say it. You seem ready. The words hung there between us. I think I am, I said. Not for anything dramatic, just ready. He tipped his head, respectful. That's a good place to be. I spent the rest of the day in quiet motion. Wrote out the holiday card list, smaller every year. Started the gingerbread dough and froze half for later. Replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors. Crossed off an item on the old list in my drawer that read, Call Boone, final copy. Already done. In the afternoon, I sat by the window with a blanket and watched the shadows lengthen. Ava texted me a photo of the crooked sunflower painting. It did look like my kitchen. I told her so. At dusk, I lit a candle. Not for any occasion, just because the light felt warm against the glass. And then I stood in the middle of the living room, looked around at the walls, the shelves, the floor beneath my feet. I whispered, You're safe now. Not to anyone. To the house. To myself. Because everything that needed to be said had been said, and everything that needed to be done had been done. What came next wasn't mine to manage, but it would come on my terms. Quietly, clearly, with both feet planted, with my name signed at the bottom of the page. The envelope came by certified mail. It arrived on a Monday, gray sky, stiff breeze, the kind of morning where everything feels heavier than it is. I heard the truck, the knock, the pause, as the mailman waited for a signature. I opened the door in my house shoes and signed with a pen that trembled just slightly in my grip. The return address said Hayward and Boone, LLP. No surprise. But still, holding it in my hands, I felt something click into place. Official. Irrevocable. I carried the envelope to the kitchen and placed it on the table without opening it right away. Poured myself tea instead. Set the cup down beside it. Let it sit there while the steam curled in the air and the clock ticked its small, unbothered rhythm. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. But I would read it anyway. Because this part, the final part, deserved attention. When I finally broke the seal and unfolded the pages, it felt like a second kind of signature. One I made not with ink, but with stillness, with breath. I read the letter from the firm, confirming that copies had been sent to all named parties. To Jeremy Waters. To Ava Howell, granddaughter. To the Howell family, CEO Michael and Diane Howell. I could see the moment in my mind. Michael's face as he opened his envelope. The way his mouth would press into that flat, hard line. The flash of disbelief, then insult, then maybe, just maybe, understanding. But that part wasn't mine to witness. I'd already had enough of his performances. I turned the last page over, placed it flat against the table, and exhaled. That was it. The house was no longer a question. I looked around me. The chipped mug in my hand. The curtains I'd sewn myself 40 years ago. The dent in the floor near the sink where Richard once dropped a hammer. All of it still mine, for now. But one day, it would belong to someone who saw it with eyes like mine, who treated it with care and curiosity, not as leverage, but as legacy. That afternoon, I walked the garden one last time before the frost truly came. The earth was firm. The lavender had gone dry, but still held its shape. I clipped a handful of stems and tied them with twine, left them on the bench out front for Jeremy to find. Inside, I baked a small loaf of bread, just enough for one person for a couple of days. The smell filled the house. I let the crust burn slightly, the way Richard liked it. I sat by the open window, listening to the faint rustle of wind and the occasional chirp of a stubborn bird. No one called that day. No one rang the bell. And I was grateful. In the evening, Jeremy came by, not to ask anything, not to thank me, just to say he'd found the lavender. "Suits the bench," he said, smiling. "It does." We didn't talk about the letter. I think he knew it had come. I think he also knew I didn't want to speak it out loud, not yet. Some victories are too quiet for words. Before he left, he reached into his jacket and handed me something small, a folded paper. "It's silly," he said. "You don't have to keep it." It was a sketch. Pencil. Light. Careful. The front porch of my house drawn from across the street. My chair. My garden shoes beside it. The window half open. "You drew this?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's just lines. But I didn't want to forget how it looked today." I held the paper in my lap after he left. Smoothed it once. Then pinned it on the fridge beside Ava's crooked sunflower. The two of them looked good together. Later that night, I lay in bed with the window cracked open and the wind curling in soft. I thought of Richard, of Michael, of everything we build and everything we break, and how, in the end, what matters is not who takes what, but who leaves behind respect. I don't expect statues or speeches or for the family to suddenly understand. But I hope one day Ava will sit in this house and run her hand along the banister and know someone stood up even when it was hard. Someone remembered she had a voice, even when no one was listening. And maybe she'll do the same. If this story meant something to you, tell someone, not about the house, about the choice. Because that's what it really was, and what it still is, every day.